San Marino City Club is proud to welcome Dr. Yumin Fong as its distinguished speaker for the February 16th dinner meeting. Dr. Fong is a pioneer both in the operating room and in the laboratory. He is an internationally recognized expert in cancer of the liver, pancreas, gallbladder, and bile ducts. He has led the research effort to employ genetically modified viruses to destroy cancer cells. Dr. Fong joined City of Hope in 2014 after more than 2 decades at the renowned Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York City. Dr. Fong is both author and innovator. He has developed many new surgical techniques and instruments and written and edited hundreds of scholarly articles, as well as nearly a dozen textbooks. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm round of applause to Dr. Yumin Fong.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and Frank and David, thank you for inviting me here to speak. I have to say, this is an unusual night, okay? My wife is actually in the audience. She usually doesn't come and hear me talk anymore. And the only excuse I think of is that the children are now out of the house, but that's actually the reason that
that goes with the video, doesn't it?
Yeah, I know.
So that's supposed to be up there. So
talk a little bit
get the signal. I gotta get
about some of the stuff we
I'll get
did.
it.
David came to see me and said, come to speak. I said, what do you want to talk about? And he said, just tell us about what's new in cancer and medicine. And so I'm actually going to do a little bit of that. I'm going to talk about what I do, which is robotics and gene therapy. But I'm also going to talk about the third thing that my wife and I do, which is being parents, and then that's, you know, getting harder and harder with all the how fast life is moving. Okay, so again, robotics and gene therapy is where we're going to start. And just for those of you who don't know the City of Hope, we are 123 acres, probably about 20 minutes from here. Okay, and it's a hospital and research center that's been there for about 100 years. And what we're really famous for is that in 1978, artificial human insulin was invented there, okay? Changed how we treat diabetes entirely and for the entire world. And then humanized antibodies were invented there in 1983, and so suddenly all these new drugs that are antibodies, you guys can't hear?
We're in the front. So.
Yep.
Running out of microphone.
Okay. I will try to speak louder, okay? Yeah, so humanized antibodies were invented there in 1983, so many of the current generation drugs that treat cancer, arthritis, and many other illnesses were made possible because of this. And it is a place where we do bone marrow transplant. But the reason I am here is because I treat cancer, and it is an amazing place that not only treats the patients individually, but also allows research. And since what I do is robotic surgery, it was one of the first places to adopt robotic surgery. So over 10,000 operations have been done there robotically. So in America, that's the biggest place for robotic surgery. And I do gene therapy, and that started there in 1997. So let's start here, okay? This is the reason I went to medical school, okay? I went to medical school in 1981 because cancer is a big problem, and one of the cancers that strikes us worldwide and kills 1 million people worldwide is liver cancer. It is a cancer that is very, very common, and in all ethnicities, it doesn't really care. And it's related to hepatitis C, hepatitis B, fatty liver, alcohol consumption. Anything that poisons the liver causes liver cancer, and 1 million people die from this cancer every year. And if somebody has hepatitis C and drink alcohol, their chance of getting cancer is 5% per year. Half the people in that situation will have cancer within a 10-year period. When I went to medical school, and when I graduated in 1984, almost everyone who got liver cancer died, okay? Our treatments were terrible, and no one lived. And so let me show you what has happened in a very, very short period of time. So in the last 3 decades, now we have a cure that's a true cure for hepatitis C. If somebody has the hepatitis C virus living in their liver, a 6-month treatment with medication could actually take it away once and for all and completely, okay? And 90% of the patients treat it. That isn't even out there as a big story, which amazes me, okay? We now have prevention for hepatitis B. All our children and grandchildren are now vaccinated against hepatitis B, and they can't get it. And then now liver cancer is curable. In fact, when I see somebody with liver cancer that started in the liver, when they come through to see me in the office, 60 to 80% of those people are going to be alive in 5 years, okay? Huge change in a very short period of time, okay? So we talk about all the things that we could predict that causes cancer and how we go prevent this cancer. But sometimes cancers happen in people where it's totally unfair. They don't deserve it at all, okay? And so one of the things I do every afternoon is I sit at my desk and I open mail. And many of the letters that arrive are parents, friends, family of folks that have gotten cancer and have been told they have a death sentence. And now they're seeking something to help, okay? And so one afternoon I was opening mail and this photograph fell to the ground, okay? It was a 9-year-old in the Midwest. She was the flyer in the cheerleading squad. She was the little girl at the top they threw up in the air and they caught her, okay? And one day, they caught her and she went, ow, on her right side, okay? And here's a 9-year-old, no hepatitis, no infections, nothing that she did to poison her liver. And when the pain didn't go away, they scanned her and they found that her entire right liver was cancer. And the cancer had gone into her vena cava, which is the big blood vessel that goes to the heart. And right there at the very top there, that's a tongue of cancer that's in her right heart. So this mother wrote me and said, they've told me now my little girl will die in the next few months. I'm unwilling to just let that happen. Is there anything you can do for me in New York City? So I said, well, we have a new drug we're testing on an experimental protocol. Don't know how it will work, because that's a whole idea behind clinical trials, is that we just don't know until we go try it. But if you're willing to bring her here, we have a good Ronald McDonald House next door, okay, where you can stay for the months that you get treated. And again, it's amazing the charity work that's done around the country so that young patients and patients of meager means could actually get treated. So she had chemotherapy, the tumor shrank, there was still a tongue in the right heart, and I took her to the operating room where I removed half her liver, I removed her vena cava and reconstructed it, and I pulled this tumor out of her right heart, okay? She had a little bit of a recovery from this because the drug we gave experimentally poisoned her heart, okay? She actually had a 70-year-old heart and not a 9-year-old heart, okay? But we got her through. And when she and her mom were getting ready to go back to the Midwest, I still remember, she came to my office and said, thank you. And her mom said, what's going to happen now? And I just don't know. And that's because back then, it was experimental. So when this photograph arrived, okay, high school graduation, 10 years later, okay, and then now, over 20 years later, when she is now working in Chicago as an actress, disease-free, this is what making medical progress is about, okay? It is about the research that brings the new treatments. It's about surgeons that learn and learn to operate and do major operations safely so that people can get through it. And it is about getting patients back to their families, back to their lives, and back to lives of individuals within our communities, okay? Colon cancer, okay? Metastatic colon cancer that goes to the liver, back in 1984, if we found that in the operating room, we would close someone. We would say, there's nothing we can do for you, okay? And then once we closed the patients, our chemotherapies were terrible, and generally people live 5 to 10 years. But it turns out half the people with colon cancer have tumors that develop in the liver because the drainage of blood from the colon goes straight to the liver first, okay? And it also turned out the liver is a very good filter. So many times it doesn't go anywhere else, but we didn't know that in 1984. And when we started to realize this, because CAT scans got invented in the 1980s, we started removing this stuff, and now lots of papers that say we should do it. This is a paper highlighted in yellow that I wrote back 15 years ago with over 1,000 patients, where if we did the surgery, it was very safe. 97% of the people back then survived the surgery. Now 99% of the people survived the surgery. And now we've changed median survival, meaning the average survival, from 6 months to 42 months, and a third of the patients are actually alive 5 years later, okay, and that was 15 years ago. Now with better and better chemotherapy, we could take someone like this with over 100 tumors, shrink their tumors. That's only 15% of the people will this happen to, but when it happens, it's miraculous. We could then remove their tumors, and they're alive 15 years later after having had hundreds of tumors inside the liver. It's because of research, medical progress, and the technical surgery. I still like that because, again, as a surgeon, I enjoy doing the surgery because it actually gets rid of cancer all at once. So in a single lifetime, metastatic colon cancer in the liver went from incurable, no one alive at 5 years, to 20 to 25% alive at 5 years just by surgery alone. Now when somebody comes through the door to see me, here is stage 4 cancer. Half the people I see in that situation will be alive 5 years later. So major, major change. Now we are obliged to make the surgery safer and easier on patients. So 80% of what I do now is robotic surgery. Okay? I still can do all the major surgeries that make the big incisions, but many of the operations we used to do now, we can actually make through little holes. So here's a surgical robot up on the upper right, and sitting at a computer, which is down in the bottom left, I can actually drive the arms through 8mm incisions and do surgery. So here's an example. Here's a patient, 50-year-old surgeon from Paris. He caught hepatitis B in the operating room. He was operating on someone with hepatitis B and caught the virus. And then, years later, he developed this liver cancer that is under the yellow arrow. Required having the left half of his liver removed. And the blood levels, AFP, which is the blood marker for cancer, was very, very high. Normal is less than 5. His was 657, so there's no doubt what it is. And so he called me and said, can I come to New York and have you take this out for me? In Paris, there are amazing liver surgeons, okay? So I said, no, you can't, because you have 20 people I can give you names of that you could go and get this out in Paris for free, because it is a single-payer universal health system in Paris. He would have gotten it for free, but he insisted on coming to New York. And so I took him to the operating room where I threw those little incisions that you see, and the extraction site is right on the belly button, okay? In 2.5 hours, I robotically removed his tumor. AFP, the blood marker for cancer, returned to normal and remains normal now 5 years later. He's been doing surgery for the last 4 years. He's not had any chemotherapy after this surgery has been done. He stayed in the hospital only 36 hours because he came to realize how expensive American health care was. Okay. And I actually made house calls at the Plaza Hotel, which was cheaper than staying in the hospital, okay? But then he went to stay with friends on Long Island, and it was snowing, and he actually called me and said, this is a week after surgery. He said, can I go shovel snow with my friends, okay? So therefore, there's no doubt in this patient, we did the right thing, okay? Both for the cancer and for the recovery and the surgery. And so that's why now, if you look on this graph, this is how many days people are in the hospital. Half my patients now that get robotic surgery, now we choose the patients carefully. That's because it's not for everyone, okay? We choose the right, because the incision is a distant third to safety and getting rid of cancer. But if someone qualifies to have robotic surgery, half my patients now go home in the first 48 hours, okay? And many of them go home on the very first day. And it's not because I'm throwing them out. That's because now I'm actually measuring how they walk. They wear this device, which is a VivoFit. The reason we use a VivoFit instead of the Fitbit is because this is waterproof. They can shower. Patients need to shower, okay? Humans need to shower. And this has a 1-year battery, so it actually does not need recharging in the time that patients are wearing it. So here's a tracing for one of those patients, 7,000 steps for the week before surgery. Then it dips down on the day of surgery, and then for 2 days it's down. By day 3, she's back to 6,000 steps, okay? And so these are people that are truly recovering very well from their surgery. So turning the page a little bit, the other thing I do is gene therapy. Huge promise for a long, long time, okay? And that picture right there, that's one of my neighbors in New York. His name is James Watson, as of Watson and Crick, okay? And in 1957, he actually was one of the 3 people that helped decipher DNA, okay, the structured DNA. It's been a long time, and the fact that we don't have genetic gene therapy, even though that was discovered in 1957, it's a failure on the medical side, okay? And then we sequenced the human genome, that's the background here, the Nature article, in 2001. So it's been a long, long time. But I'd like to announce to you that this year, okay, 2015, October, the very first gene therapy in man was approved in the United States, okay? So I want to describe that a little bit to you, since I had a tiny bit to do with it, okay? But I want to start here, okay? That's because when we think of gene diseases, there are many of them that we need to go solve. So I want to start here with adenosine deaminase deficiency. This is an enzyme in our white blood cells that help the white blood cells kill bacteria and fight infection. And when that's missing, when that enzyme doesn't work, we end up with what are called bubble boys. The kids that can't leave the bubble because they would get infection and die. So depending on your generation, that's either Jake Gyllenhaal in The Bubble Boy, or for me, it was John Travolta, okay? And I still remember the movie, okay? John Travolta being inside in the last scene when he leaves the bubble and knowing what's about to happen. It breaks my heart still, okay? This is what bubble boys look like now. This is a pair of siblings, and the one on the left here has been out of a bubble for 5 years without major infection, okay? Because Don Cohn went and engineered his white blood cells to express that enzyme that did not work, okay, at birth. I'm sure this is going to be heading towards approval for regular human use. But we're now also able to edit genes and try to attack diseases like muscular dystrophy, hemophilia, hepatitis, and HIV. All of these are here, and all these trials are starting. In fact, one of the trials starting at City of Hope this month is that we're actually taking patients who've been chronically infected with HIV. We're engineering the stem T cells not to express the receptor for HIV so they will become non-infectable. And then by putting them back in, we're hoping that that will cure those individuals of HIV. But what I work on mainly is oncolytic viruses, okay? I design viruses that find cancer cells wherever it's hiding in the body and kill them. And so the idea is that if we had a virus that only likes infecting cancer cells and replicate in them and then kill the cancer cell, then many more viruses would come out and infect the cancer cells nearby. And if it doesn't infect normal cells, or even if it infects, doesn't replicate, then we would have an agent that actually makes more of itself and attacks cancer and potentially cures people with cancer even when the disease is widespread. And so it actually looks like this, okay? This is a plate of mesothelioma cells. This is the lung lining cells, cancer cells from a disease where people get it from asbestos, from cigarette smoking. And almost every patient who's ever gotten mesothelioma has died. Okay, that's because our treatments with chemotherapy and radiation are not very good. By throwing one virus per 100 tumor cells on this plate, you see the infection, that's the green, okay? That's because I labeled all these viruses as fluorescent green, and as it infects, it turns the cells green. And then within about 12 to 14 to 24 hours, all these cells will get infected and die. This virus is currently in human clinical trials at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center for mesothelioma. But this is what the public thinks, okay? Remember the movie I Am Legend with Will Smith? The whole premise of that movie was that a genetically re-engineered measles virus intended for curing of cancer turns people into vampires, okay? And we've been blamed for making zombies. And so let me assure you, if you knew all the engineering that we do to make these viruses as safe as possible and not replicate in anything but cancer cells, and so not going to happen, okay? But I still think that it would be great if Will Smith would play me in a movie, though, okay? So all of these viruses at the bottom are now in human clinical trials, and the whole idea is that we have now made viruses that are really good for killing cancer. And many of them will, so the plate on the left are mouse livers that are full of cancers and a model where they form cancers. And on the right, treated with one dose of virus and all the tumors are gone, okay? And this is human. This is a study that I did with human liver cancer, somebody with metastatic colon cancer who has failed all chemotherapy. And here's a patient that after one single dose of virus went from a CEA, that's a blood marker for cancer, of 800 down to 400, and the tumor shrank by 75% inside the liver. And this man went on to live 4.5 years without responding to any other therapy, okay, when he was about to die from his metastatic colon cancer. Now, This study, however, was back in 2008, okay? And I learned a huge lesson here in that it's not just the science and the clinical studies, it's also the intellectual property and people fighting over who own something that should be humanity's because it actually helps patients and helps people. And so this got stuck in IP health and never got moved forward. And so for all those people that kept it in IP health, I think that there will be judgment one day, okay? Okay. But there are many other viruses. Here is a vaccinia virus, which is one that comes from the virus that was used to wipe out smallpox in the world, okay? This is a virus that's a pox virus, cowpox virus, that's injected to vaccinate people against smallpox. Turns out it kills cancer. And by engineering it to be even more specific for cancer, that lump you see on the shoulder there, that's actually melanoma, a skin cancer, in a lymph node. And by injecting it, it disappears, okay? But where the triumph came is, the first triumph is really with this drug. It's called T-VEC. It is a virus based on a herpes simplex virus, the same virus that causes cold sores in some individuals. It's been engineered to kill cancer as well as to secrete a hormone called GM-CSF. This hormone teaches the body what is foreign and what is self, so that suddenly the body starts recognizing cancer all over the body. And this particular virus, when injected into humans in a human phase 3 randomized trial with 430 patients, you can inject a cancer right here in the skin, and the lung metastases would melt away, okay? And, and it works both by direct killing and by vaccination. The data was so good that, again, in October of this past year, it was approved by the US FDA as the very first gene therapy in man. So you'll be hearing a lot more about viruses, and so very excited about where we've been anticipating this for so many decades, and now the future is here. Now we're trying to figure out what the next generations are going to be, how are we going to make sure that hospitals can deliver this in a reasonable fashion, and now we're also trying to figure out how to make the cost as low as possible so that people worldwide can have treatments like this, okay? And so these are just some of the trials I am planning at the City of Hope, and they will include the measles virus for pancreatic cancer, herpes virus for liver cancer, NDV, which is Newcastle disease virus, which is a chicken virus for disseminated cancers of all types, and brand new viruses called HOVs, Hope Oncolytic Viruses, which we are making for triple-negative breast cancer, which is really the main focus right now of trying to make progress forward, because that's such a horrible disease that affects so many patients, and without very much that we can do about it. So just to finish, because when I was talking to David, David goes, you do all this stuff, do you spend any time with your family? So that was actually posed to me, okay? And the answer is yes. And my wife and I have spent a lot of time with my children. And so I just want to go through, because life is very busy now, okay? If you think about how life is, and in medicine, we're now mandated by law to only work 80 hours, okay? And but if you go 80 hours, right, that's 11.4 hours per day. If you sleep 7 hours a day, you feed for 2 hours, and you shower and groom for an hour, and then you watch American Idol or the Game of Thrones, okay? You can't watch both, okay, for an hour, and do an email for an hour. Suddenly you only have 30 minutes left, okay? And that's why life is so crazy, okay? So how do you fit in family? How do you go do all of this? Because my wife and I have 3 lovely children, okay? And this is also the reason that surgeons and professionals of all types are so burnt out. And it's really this perceived imbalance between career and personal life, and that the job interferes with personal life, okay? And our children are different than us, okay? Isn't that true, okay? I still remember, my parents would drop me off at school the first day of school, and they would pick me up on the last day. They wouldn't be expected to come to school at all, okay? What's this about showing up all the time? And I just don't get it, but they try to make me, okay? They try to make me. I'm kind of old school. And so our approach is slightly different than what the school would have liked, okay? And that's because when I went to college, this was one of my mentors, Leon Cooper. He was a Nobel laureate in 1964 in physics, and he's the reason that Sheldon Cooper in Big Bang Theory is called Cooper. One night I asked him how he accomplished so much, and he says, focus only on what's important, okay? So that's our parenting style, okay? So I call it the Fong-Bergman parenting style because, yeah, but it's really the Bergman-Fong parenting style, okay? So we focus on what's important to us, not necessarily what's important to the teachers and the coaches, okay? And that's because now the coaches think they know better, and some of the teachers think they know better, okay? And it should be us, okay? It's our families. So after about third grade, I stopped going to parent-teacher conferences because I got very tired of just hearing how good my kids were doing, okay? But I went to every musical performance, theater performance, and athletic event. So this led to a very strange dichotomy. There was one year, I got a nasty letter about how disengaged I was about my children's schoolwork. And at the same time, I got a citation from the arts department about being the only parent who came to every theater performance, okay? And so I actually have them in the same frame, okay? Okay. So, again, this is not how everyone should raise their children, but this is how I raised my children, okay? We shared interests, okay? And first and foremost, it was about movies, theater, and the arts, okay? And so upper right-hand side there, that was my daughter Sandy and I going to the American Idol tryouts, okay? And where we stood in line, we sang, and we had a great time. Down in the bottom left here, it's us going to a Men in Black premiere, okay? And we share a lot of hobbies, okay? And first and foremost is that it was sports. My wife and I actually met at Brown University on the sports bus going out to the complex, and therefore our children grew up with lots of sports. You know, my wife would coach them in fencing and swimming, and I would coach them in volleyball and track and those things that we cared about. And that's because, again, sharing something that is passionate to all of us was important about and central to our engagement, and gave us reasons to go spend weekends and vacation time away and doing different things, okay? But then the biggest share, in terms of time, was target shooting. Now, you may think that's kind of strange because we lived in New York City, okay? But my children came to me when they were like 14 years old, and they said, we want to go to the Olympics. And it was very clear they were never going to grow beyond 5'2", okay? So the likelihood they would go in swimming would be very low, even though Abby was an academic All-American in swimming, okay? But she was 5'2", and she was New York City champion in swimming and in the sprints, but she was never going to be world class. So we tried to find a sport that I knew something about, or my wife knew something about, and this was target shooting. I had done it in my youth. Target shooting turned out to be a very successful sport for Americans, okay? And it's also the third most participated in sport in the Olympics. 87 countries participate in it. The Americans have won 44 gold medals. And the whole sport for the women is that they shoot at a target 50 meters away, and they try to put shots within a group of a dime. Okay, that's about that bottom, that left hand there. That's 5 shots standing up with a gun, not supported by anything but the individual. And my children could group it in a dime, okay? But this also allowed me to teach them about life management skills. And the most important is multitasking, because we don't have enough hours. So this is Sandy at the World Cup competition in Bangkok, where because she couldn't fit in all her SATs, she took the SATs. In Thailand, okay? And at the same time, I was able to schedule that I was a keynote speaker at the Thai National Congress on liver cancer and evaluate plans for the Child-Born Cancer Center for the Princess of Thailand, okay? So we did a lot of stuff in the same week, okay? And so it was a proud moment when I got to coach in Beijing, 2 of my children. And this is a picture that Danielle took, my youngest, as they were waiting at the entrance of the stadium to come in to the Parade of Nations, okay? And it is like really cool, okay? And also to coach her, Sandy, when she was one of the world champions, okay? But now this multitasking goes on, okay? And my children don't realize that because we're friends on Facebook with them, I actually know what they do. So 2 of my children, okay? So 2 of my children are now in medical school. And my oldest is a 4th year at the University of Chicago. My middle child is at the Mount Sinai Hospital, and both of them had gone to Princeton, and my youngest is now working at American Express after graduating from Columbia. But I realized that my middle child, even though she's supposed to be just studying and studying and studying, This is what she did this last year, too. She just had a film debut at the New York City Documentary Film Festival, and she still sings in a group, and that's them in the recording studio this year, okay? And so I was trying to decide whether I should call them to yell at them or call them to congratulate them. But again, sharing with your children is important, and I just think that many times we just need not to let the professional coaches now take over our kids' lives and actually lend a little bit of our lives in there. Okay, so thank you very much for inviting me.
Time for a couple questions?
Sure. So I'd be happy to talk about anything from robotics to gene therapy to parenting, okay? Yes.
Or is it that the surgery is better and you cut it all out? I mean, what happens when you do the gene therapy?
Yeah.
Some of the markers where you'll see traces of an enzyme or something like that, where it's coming
Yep.
back because, that gene.
Okay, so I sense that in your question, so let me say the questions from here, okay? So the question was, I will break the question down into three parts, okay? Are there markers for cancer coming back even after long periods of time, okay? And I'll answer that first. For different cancers, there are different markers for when cancer comes back. There are some cancers where we actually have very good blood markers, okay? And we know as soon, so medullary thyroid cancer, when calcitonin comes up in the blood, we don't need a scan. We know cancer's back, okay? And that's because almost nothing else produces that in the body. And it could be, colon cancer, where CEA comes up. So there are many ways that we go look for cancer recurring, okay? And so for every cancer, there is a recommended follow-up in terms of length of time, the tests we do, and how often we do the tests, okay? Now, if I have somebody who goes a long, long time and cancer is not present, do we stop following because we actually believe that the cancer is cured? The answer is yes, okay? And that's because for colon cancer, for pancreatic cancer, for most of the solid tumors, if it's not back in 10 years, we actually believe those people are highly likely to be cured and highly likely to die of old age, heart disease, something else entirely separate from cancer, okay? So for most solid tumors, and that's tumors that come from all the organs that are internal, we generally stop following people after about 10 years, except to make sure that whatever treatment side effects from our cancer treatments don't become the major health issue. So if somebody's had radiation to their chest, they could get coronary disease. So we actually should now switch over to checking their hearts rather than checking for cancer. The third part of the question that was asked is that if we have all these fancy therapies, okay, will those take over completely? And I've been asked this for 2 decades, okay? That's because I do gene therapy. So people would say, why did you do surgery at all? We're going to go figure it out, and then there will be no more surgery to do, okay? It turns out, for solid tumors, those are, again, from the internal organs, almost no cancer is, at the present time, curable without removing the big deposits of cancer, okay? So surgery is still necessary. I'm hoping one day that we would be able to get away with not having to do surgery, but at least for now, okay, the surgery is still important. And trying to figure out the sequence of injectable therapies, radiation therapies, immune therapies with the surgery. Is it before, is it after, is it some before, some after, and then how long should it go for? That's the whole program that we need to put together for each individual patient, okay? Okay, so there were 2 questions sent in, so I'm going to, why don't we, yep, go.
Is most of the research being developed through research hospitals here in the United States, percentage-wise compared to the rest of the world?
Research really comes in 3 parts, okay? I'm going to be very politically incorrect here, okay? And but I am, I'm just very honest about these things, okay? There's a lot of research that's done just to get grant funding and to advance people's academic careers, okay? I'm getting too old for that. And when I see experiments being done that it's just waste of money and just meant to fill up people's CVs and not really heading towards humans, okay? I'm not happy about it, okay? And in fact, when any of the famous surgeons retire, I actually have a little book. I actually write down their name and write down what I think and relief of something that's human malady, okay? Now, there is a lot of research that's being done that is heading towards man and trying to go cure a disease of some type, okay? And a lot of it is done at major research hospitals. And that's because a lot of this kind of research, it's very, very hard to do without infrastructure. And infrastructure for research back in the 1940s and 50s and 60s could just be a room with some blood pressure measurement things because most of it was physiology. Now, with all the fancy gene things that we need to go look at and all the assays we need to do, you actually need someplace that has those core facilities that allow the investigators to concentrate on their questions and not worry about how the assays are run. And so it requires a big, big infrastructure. But a lot of research is also being done by industry, okay? That's both good and bad. And that's because, again, our capitalist system works. And if it is really raced to a cure, and part of that cure allows a company or investors or retirees who have invested in those companies to actually get returns, it does help. But I just wish they would charge reasonable prices, okay? And that's because, you know, there are times that it's just totally unreasonable what the dollar amounts are. They're being asked for new medicines, and so all three contribute. It's probably a partnership of industry and major research institutions that allow most of the major progress to go forward.
We had a couple questions that were emailed in, so why don't you take those?
Okay, so I'm going to go through there were two questions that were emailed in, and one of the questions was, please comment on any advances to try to ablate pancreatic cancer in addition to immune therapy. What is the role for vascular interventional radiology? Okay. Pancreatic cancer is one of the cancers we've actually not done very well in, okay? Over the last 30 years, we've made minimal progress. When someone gets pancreatic cancer in the United States, that's as first world as we get, only 7% of the people that are resected, meaning after their tumors are removed, actually are alive 5 years later, okay? It's very sobering, okay? And it doesn't matter what else we do. And it's because our chemotherapies and our radiation therapies are not perfect. And so what this question is actually asking is that now there are folks that are saying, let's go and block the blood vessels going to the tumors, or burning the tumors, or freezing the tumors to try to not only kill the cancer in the local primary place, but leave antigens so that the body could recognize it. Well, for pancreatic cancer, it's not been that simple, okay? And for melanoma, skin cancer, the body almost recognizes it. So when we go and destroy it and leave some of it in a local place, the body actually picks up on those antigens and gets vaccinated and recognizes the cancer. So even though there have been many, many studies that are being done to try to exploit the local ablation, none have actually been proven to actually been helpful. That doesn't mean that if somebody has a primary tumor not removable and we go through chemotherapy, radiation, and now it's a year down the line, 2 years down the line, if it's still the only place we see, that we wouldn't go and do some sort of other ablative therapy, but highly unlikely that that will be the change and long-term outcome of that patient. The second question was, I am from a third world country. Before I came to the U.S., I was not quite familiar with cancer. Reason may be cancer was undetected or undiagnosed or not prevalent in my country, Sri Lanka. When I read the world statistics, I learned that cancer is commonly prevalent in developed countries compared to underdeveloped countries. Is this a myth? If not, what is the main reason for this? Is cancer a result of industrialization and resultant environmental hazards such as pollution, lead, and asbestos? Now, all of those, asbestos, lead, pollution, all are related to cancer. There's a reason that in China now, cancer is the #1 killer. It's not heart disease. In America, it's heart disease, okay? In China, it actually is cancer. And it's because the level of pollution and environmental control is actually much lower. But the reason that in many undeveloped countries, it is not, the cancer incidents are actually not even known, okay? And that's because in many countries that I visit, I do a number of medical missions I to northern Thailand, to other places where it is more as much about the food, the light bulbs in the operating room. It is not about finding advanced cancer that people would be doing major surgeries or expensive therapies for, okay? So I don't think that in those countries, in the emerging nations, the cancer statistics are actually kept up because that's not the focus of where the dollars and the healthcare economy is going. But in all those countries, there are high incidence of cancers, okay? Yes?
Can you actually do robotic surgery by not being in the same room?
You can, okay? So the question is, why would you? Okay, so, no, I'm not being facetious and I don't mean to minimize, okay? But the robots originally were designed not to have the surgeon in the same room. They were originally conceived as a Defense Department project. It is meant that if I were sitting at Walter Reed Army Medical Center and one of our soldiers got shot in the Persian Gulf and was brought to the aircraft carrier and they didn't have a liver surgeon on board, that I would be able to help that person on the aircraft carrier. Or if a person up in the space station, okay, and I would be able to do something about it. But in practicality, there's a delay in every time I move the instruments, even down the street, okay, there will be a slight delay. Will it be tolerated? Is it acceptable? So in normal healthcare, it's not, okay? In the military, it might be, okay? And in normal healthcare, there's no great reason in a first world country like ours for the surgeon not to be in the same facility, except when things arise that need extra expertise, okay? So some of the things that we're now trying to set up is telementoring. Not to drive a robot 100 miles away, but if a surgeon 100 miles away was wondering, and if my expertise was in an area that they're wondering about, can I actually just take a look and offer some advice, not having to fly there? And now there are modules and computer link-ups that allow us to do that, okay? And so that's much more practical than saying that I'm going to go drive a robot that's in Arizona on doing an operation, okay? But there has been a robotic operation done across the Atlantic, okay? But it was done on 9/10, the day before 9/11, and so got no publicity, okay? Yes?
What is the usual therapy for multiple myeloma? And does stem therapy help that?
Yes, and so multiple myeloma, again, I'm speaking out of my expertise because those are liquid tumors. Liquid tumors are the blood tumors, and cancers are divided into liquid tumors and solid tumors. I'm firmly entrenched in the solid tumors, but it's usually chemotherapy. It could be bone marrow transplantation, okay? But lately, one of the very interesting trials that came from the Mayo Clinic is that they took a measles virus that infected multiple myeloma and put people in complete remission, okay? They actually found these cells that were trying to replicate and become this blood cancer and kill them, okay? And that was reported beginning of 2015 and made a huge splash. Now they're trying to figure out, so it's been a handful of individuals. They're trying to figure out for those individuals what was different about them from other individuals that did not respond.
Is immune therapy a type of gene therapy? And the second question is, I think I've read or heard that immune therapy is now the most promising therapy for the treatment of cancer.
Okay. I will answer the first. Yeah. So there are two questions. One, is immune therapy gene therapy? Okay. Now, immune therapy doesn't have to be gene therapy. Immune therapy is anything that stimulates our body to recognize cancer better. Okay. And our bodies recognize cancer in a number of ways, our immune system. It could be the T cell. Those are the cells that come and recognize specifically a target and kills it, okay? And it could be the B cell. It could be a cell that secretes antibodies to recognize the cancer and then stimulates the whole immune system to recognize it. And so Many times, so many of the promising drugs that you're talking about, okay, so it turns out it's not just the actors, the cells that are running out there to look for cancer cells and kill the cancer cells that are important for our immune reaction. Turns out to be many cancer cells that stop our body from recognizing cancer as foreign. And many of these are what we call Treg cells, okay? They are cells that stop us also from attacking our own organs and recognizing them as foreign, so it stops autoimmune disease. And so it is thought that it's this delicate balance between cells that want to go kill things that it thinks it's foreign from cells that protect us against those cells attacking our own cells. And the most promising immune therapies for cancer recently include a compound called anti-CTLA-4. That's an antibody that shuts down the cells that stop our body from recognizing cancer. And there's also a series of antibodies that are called checkpoint inhibitor antibodies that actually stop certain immune cells from suppressing our immune reaction to cancer. So those are coming along. They've worked very, very well for melanoma, again, the skin cancer that is almost recognizable, some lung cancers, okay, and some kidney cancers. Whether it will actually by themselves be totally effective is still meant to be seen. And so the gene therapy side of it, we can now engineer people's T cells to recognize cancer. So we can actually take T cells out of people's bone marrows or circulation, put them on the petri dish, grow them up to be the type of cell that kills cancer, and then engineer them to recognize something on the cancer that's different than anything else in the human body, and send it back in. Okay, those are called CAR T cells, and some of the work that's being done there are spectacular. So many different ways that people are trying to attack it. But the good news is that for 30 years people have been trying to do immune therapy, and only over the last 2, 3, 5 years has there been major progress. Okay, that's why everybody's excited. Okay, but there are many, many different parts of cancer therapy.
For gene transfer, I think it's called CRISPR.
Yes.
Do you use that, and how do you think it will affect it? It speeds up the gene.
It's not only speeds it up, okay? It is so specific. You can actually go and say, I just want to change these 3 bases in this entire gene that is 600 bases long. And it would go in there and could actually change it in many, many of the cells very quickly, okay? So CRISPR technology is spectacular. And it gives us the promise that we will be able to cure certain diseases that only require some of the cells to be changed. So hemophilia, where we can't quite make the clotting factors, okay? Thalassemia, where just trying to process some of the blood waste is impossible. And so some of these where we just need to be able to make 10% of a normal person's levels of protein, I think you're going to see a lot of those being treated and cured, okay? But beyond CRISPRs, there are many other things that are now coming that allow us to go and gene edit, okay? And what's going to be really hard now is going to be, say, where do we stop, okay? And what is worth going and fixing, and how sick does someone have, how sick does a disease have to make someone? So all these that are being done right now are in what we call somatic cells, which are adult human cells that are already made. Now there's a whole movement starting to edit embryos, you know, and there a lot of the ethical issues are going to come up. A lot of the, there are just many, many issues we're going to need to face because, again, we can now remake genes in cells, whether it's already in an entire intact human being or in an embryo, and we need. So one of the editorials that I'm actually in the middle of writing, because I edit a journal called Molecular Therapy Oncolytics, okay, where we actually talk about this stuff and publish this stuff. But one of the editorials I'm actually in the middle of writing is, who are we going to go put in charge of all of this, okay? And in terms of saying, should we, shouldn't we? And how are we going to go safeguard a modification of a gene that could get into the entire human genome that in a way that we don't want, okay? And so both promising times and challenging times.
The stem cells that you're using,
Mm-hmm.
are they from the donor himself? Or
Yep. Those are from the donors themselves, okay? But to take true human stem cells and engineer in the United States requires enormous oversight and approval process, okay? So let me refocus that a little bit. For 5 years, I served on a committee at the National Institute of Health called the Recombinant DNA Advisory Committee, okay? And so what this committee was in charge of was anything gene therapy, any modification of anything that could get into man. So if somebody was trying to make a new bacteria in the laboratory that could somehow get into our intestines, this committee actually looked at it. Somebody tries to rechange Ebola, okay, into a slightly different structure, this committee looked at it. And for 3 years, I was chair of the committee, okay, and every time there was somebody trying to engineer the bird flu to be infectable in mammals, I had to hold public hearings, okay? And so for editing embryos, it's a huge, huge deal. There's all kinds of debates going on and trying to figure out what the oversight should be, okay? And should it even happen? And these are being hotly debated. But in somatic cells, meaning cells that are already grown up in you and I, even if it's what we call stem cell, meaning it can become other cells, but it's really not an embryo. These are cells that are sitting in our bone marrow, and if it's suddenly that we need more red blood cells, it becomes the red blood cells. If it's certain white blood cells we need, it becomes those white blood cells. They just have a possibility of going to many different lines, and that's why we call them stem cells, but they're not truly embryonic stem cells, okay? Yes?
The President has called for a cure to cancer.
Yep.
What do you think about the if and when of that?
Yeah. So for those in the audience who don't know about this initiative, it's called the Moonshot Initiative, okay? And it arose out of sadness, okay? And that's because Joe Biden, our vice president, actually had a son who recently died of brain cancer, okay? And he was a young man who got a brain cancer and died. And so he was making a big push to try to increase the funding for cancer research. And so our president has asked for that from Congress. I hope that it doesn't get all deleted as it goes through the houses, okay? It's always hard in an election year. And I hope this initiative moves forward and continues in the next administration, whichever party takes that administration. But what this initiative actually calls for are good things, okay? It's actually asking for an industrial and academic partnership to try to make progress in human treatment of human cancer, okay? And which is different than just trying to increase the funding level of the NIH so that we can have many more grants that do studies that fill up people's CVs and enhance their careers, so rather than try to cure cancer. In the past, sometimes intersect, but they don't always, okay? And so it is a good thing. They've asked for a good amount of money for it, okay? And I just hope that it doesn't all dissipate either in committees or with a change of administration. Well, thank you very much, okay? Thank you.
So Yuman, on behalf of the San Marino City Club, we want to present you with this plaque recognizing your presentation tonight. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed our presentation tonight. So next month, we have a little bit of a change of plans. Originally, we were supposed to have Dr. Alex Chernus here at the San Marino City Center performing on March 15th. Instead, we found out that the Huntington Library books up sooner than we expected, and so after trying about 9 different dates, it looks like March 15th is the date that is available for us at the Huntington Library, and so we will be at the Huntington Library next month. Our speaker will be Steve Hindle, who is the Director of Research at the Huntington Library. So hope to see you all there. All right, thank you.